The history of microscope. History of microscope during 1590s to Dutch spectacle makes Hans and Zacharias Janssen began experimenting. They would put several lenses in a tube and made a very important discovery. Object near the end of the tube appeared to be enlarged, much larger than using a magnifying glass in the 1660s. Robert Hooke used this crude microscope and began looking at all kinds of objects. He put all his drawing in a book called Micropia. He is also credited with naming cells and also studied fleas and other objects under his microscope in the 1670s. Anton van Leeuwenhoek was a grinding and polishing lens person. He was considered the best person around. These lenses led to him building a microscope which was considered the first practical microscope in 1674. Anton van Leeuwenhoek was the first to see and describe bacteria. Since this time, microscopes have gotten better. Compound microscopes have advanced from multiplying times 3 to multiplying 400 times, but other huge advance in microscopes didn't occur until German physicist Ernest Rosca, an electrical engineer. Max Null constructed an electron microscope in 1931. The electron microscope uses accelerated electrons in order to view objects. Modern electron microscope can magnifying up to 10 million times. The microscope widens and expands from this point, with people from around the world working on similar upgrades and lenses technologies at the same time.
Invention or discovery of microscope. During the first century after the year 100, glass had invented and the Roman were looking through the glass microscope. They discovered that if you had one of these lenses over an object, the object would look longer. The early simple microscope, which were really only magnifying glasses, had one power. One thing that was very common and interesting to look at was flies and other tiny insects. These early magnifiers were hence called Flea glasses. A Dutch father-son team named Hans and Zacharias Janssen invented the first so-called compound microscope in the late 16th century when they discovered that if they put a lens at the top and bottom of a tube and looked through its object on the other end, it became magnified. August Kohler is credited with inventing a way to provide uniform microscope illumination that allowed specimens to be photographed. Ernst devised a way to allow for different magnifications using one microscope by putting multiple lenses on a movable turret at the end of the lens tube. Galileo heard of their experiments and started experimenting on his own to describe the principles of lenses and light rays and improve the both microscope and telescope. Robert Hooke, an Englishman, also spent much of his life working with microscope and improved their design and capabilities. Little was done to improve the microscope until the middle of 19th century, when great strides were made in quality instruments like today's microscope emerged. Because of foreign production, quality of microscope have become affordable for all. Zacharias Janssen, the inventor of the microscope, would marvel the quality of even the most basic microscope found in school today.
The contribution of microscope in scientific development. A microscope have contributed significantly in the fields of cell biology and histology, where great discoveries have been made over the years. A microscope allows scientists to view detailed relationships between the structures and functions at different levels of resolution. Microscopes have continued to be improved since they were first invented and used by early scientists like Anthony Leeuwenhoek to observe bacteria, yeast, and blood cells. A microscope is an instrument that is used to magnify small objects. Some microscopes can even be used to observe an object at the cellular level, allowing scientists to see the shape of a cell, its nucleus, mitochondria, and other organelles.
5 types of microscope. Number 1. Stereomicroscope. The stereomicroscope or dissecting microscope is an optical microscope variant design for low magnification observation of a sample, typically using light reflected from the surface of an object rather than transmitted through it. Number 2. Compound microscope. The optical microscope, also referred to as light microscope, is a type of microscope that commonly uses visible light and a system of lenses to generate magnified image of small objects. Number 3. Inverted microscope. It was invented in 1850 by J. Lawrence Smith, faculty member of Tulane University. An inverted microscope is a microscope with its light source and condenser on the top, above this stage pointing down, while the objectives and turret are below this stage pointing up. Number 4. Metallurgical microscope. The metallurgical microscope is an important tool for metallurgists, with the help of which fine structural details can be studied. Since the metallographic specimens are opaque to light, the sample must be illuminated by reflected lights. Number 5. Polarizing microscope is the polarized light microscope can be mean any of number of optical microscope techniques involving polarized light.
What are the uses and why microscope is important? First, microscope help the scientists to study the microorganisms, the cells, the crystalline structures, and the molecular structures. They are one of the important diagnostic tools when the doctor examines the tissue samples. Second, the microscope is important because biology mainly deals with the study of cells and their contents, genes in all organisms. In other words, this microscope is one of the most useful instruments science uses in the study of ultramicroscopic structure, which is important because this study represents the nearest anatomy can make the chemical structure, and on this level, structure may give the most valuable clues to function.
Therefore, a microscope is an instrument that makes an enlarged image of a small object, thus revealing details too small to be seen by the unaided eye. The most familiar kind of microscope is the optical microscope, which uses visible light focused through lenses.